Welcome to the Under 8 podcast, a 3 times per week college basketball show brought to you in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is April 1st, 11:46 p.m. My name is Josh Mullenix. On today's pod, we have a set women's Final Four. We'll talk Final Four predictions. Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers on their way to Cleveland in the Final Four. Let's talk about it all right now on the Under 8 podcast. Josh Doering here with me, a pair of big time games on a big time night in college hoops. Josh, we'll start with Iowa versus LSU, a rematch of last year's championship game. Iowa 94, LSU 87. Caitlin Clark 41, 12, and 7 is the stat line for the best player in the sport on a night that she broke even more records. A big time performance. She got some help from some of her role players, and it took 94 points, and you needed almost all 94 of them. But the Hawkeyes get their payback, get their revenge after last year's loss in the 2023 tournament.
Yeah, definitely a game of runs and to a certain extent a game of two halves. You know, you knew this one was going to be, well, this is the two highest scoring offenses in the country, so it was probably going to be high scoring.
Yeah.
But on the first three possessions, when Haley Van Lith goes under a screen and Clark hits a three, and then a couple possessions later, Clark blows right by her, and then three of the other five Iowa starters hit threes. It was just one of those nights, and was not all that impressed with Clark in the first half. There were some turnovers. It just wasn't. Of course, she put up numbers, but it wasn't great. To me, Angel Reese was clearly the best player on the floor in the first half. And I don't know if it was the ankle, if it was the decisions the ball handlers were making, because she was clearly frustrated with not getting the ball enough. She just started missing some shots. I think she missed at least 8 in a row at one point after starting, I believe it was 6 of 8. It just kind of fell apart. And when Angel Reese wasn't the best player on the floor, LSU just couldn't keep up. And, Flau'jae Johnson kind of stepped up to try and keep them in the game to a certain extent, but Caitlin Clark just started making everything in the third quarter. And I know Anissa Morrow kind of got to numbers at the end, but in terms of what was needed from them, Iowa's role players fulfilled their, even with Hannah Stokey battling foul trouble and not being able to really get into a rhythm, Iowa's role players stepped up and fulfilled their roles to a larger extent than LSU's did. And outside of the fact that Caitlin Clark was ridiculous in the second half, that was the other big difference for me.
A couple different times in this tournament, Caitlin has had not great halves. But it's almost inevitable that at some point she's going to start making shots. And whether it's the best player on the other team or the collective effort's not the right word, the collective performance from the opposing side, that at some point you're going to have to withstand a stretch, whether it's a quarter or a half, or oftentimes it's a full game and there's nothing you can do about it. But you're probably at some point going to have to withstand a ludicrous stretch from Caitlin. And after the first quarter, LSU puts up 31 in the first 10 minutes, only puts up 14 and 13 in the next two quarters. So they scored more points in the first quarter than the following two quarters combined. And it just wasn't quite enough. I thought that today in general was just going to come down to we talked about those 4 players that were at the top of the superstar list on this particular night, right? Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Paige Beckers, Juju Watkins, and there was going to be plenty of things to talk about. But at the end of the day, which 2 players across the 2 games were the best ultimately? If those 2 teams didn't come away victorious, it would have been surprising for me. Um, and ultimately, what Kalen did in the second half was just too much on a night that, yes, for stretches, Angel Reese was awesome, but 17 points on 21 shots, even though you stuff the stat sheets elsewhere. 20 rebounds is insane. 24, 2, and 3, along with 17 points. Of course, she put her impact on this game in as many ways as she possibly could. But at the end of the day, that probably wasn't going to be enough from a scoring perspective to keep up on a night where Caitlin ultimately ends up with 41. And when you get some of the performances that you did in support, it was probably going to need to be a little bit better than that from a points production standpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, that third quarter, there was one point where I think people are now calling it the reverse Jordan. Have you seen this?
No.
Where I think somebody's got a picture of it where after one of the threes, Van Lith is just doing the shrug because, in fairness to her, she couldn't keep Caitlin Clark in front of her in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
But that third quarter, that was not bad defense at all. Caitlin just kept making threes over her. There's nothing you can do about that. And at one point, she just, shrugged because there is nothing else she can do.
Yeah.
That's what you have to live with, because you can't let her keep getting to the basket. It seemed like they were trying to just take away everybody else, which worked to a certain extent after the first quarter or so. But by that point, Angel Reese had cooled off. They weren't getting her the ball as much. There was clearly some frustration there. Then Caitlin Clark makes all the shots, and they just didn't get enough right. LSU was going to have to win this game by having, 3 of the best 4 players on the floor? At least 2 of the best 3?
Yeah.
Because it had to be Angel Reese matching Caitlin Clark, and then whether it was Morrow, whether it was Fuzzy Johnson, maybe both of them, a couple other players were going to have to also carry that load, and Johnson tried her best to be that other person, but it wasn't enough when Clark got going the way she did, and when every single player that stepped onto the floor for Iowa contributed in a meaningful way. Even though, Stokey didn't have a great game, she didn't get to play that much because it was always worried about the fouls.
Mm-hmm.
But Addison O'Grady came in and did a really, really good job. It looked for a while there, I thought that Reese was just going to punish them all night if they couldn't keep Stokey on the floor. And then all of a sudden, that stopped happening. And they were able to put together a run where Stokey was on the bench, keep things even at halftime, give themselves a good opportunity, and then let Caitlin Clark take it over, and that's exactly what happened.
It's about right. 94-87. Iowa and Caitlin Clark going back to the Final Four. Anything else on that game?
No, I don't really think a very interesting season for LSU. I'm curious to see what this turns into next season, both from does Angel Reese come back, and also does Kim Mulkey in any way, shape, or form change roster building philosophy? Because, I mean, we don't need to do a whole kind of breakdown at this point. We've talked about this multiple times this season, but they just didn't get anything close to maximizing all of their players. Specifically, Haley Van Lith had a really, really tough season. She was kind of the odd person out in terms of not getting the numbers and the opportunities, and just didn't play particularly well. But there are a lot of alphas on this team. There are a lot of players that are used to being the most important, best, first option. I'm just curious if And then there also is the part of now you don't get to just kind of go play and see what you can do because you're the defending national champions. You're the second most popular team in the sport. Maybe number one if you combine all of it.
At
I
least the
mean,
second most
yeah,
discussed team in the
right.
sport.
However you want to frame it. But not only do you have the pressure of being the defending national champions and you're not sneaking up on anybody, you have all the eyeballs on you because of who your coach is, because of who your star is, because of the transfers you brought in. There was a lot there. And I'm just curious if this at all changes anything for, I highly doubt it. But does Kim Mulkey do even some kind of slight philosophical adjustment based on how this went? Because you haven't really seen an experiment like this in the women's game before. At least one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. There's part of me that's like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And the other part of me is he lost to Caitlin Clark in the Elite Eight by 7. So
Right.
like it wasn't perfect, but
It was not a train wreck.
How bad did it really go if
Right.
your season ended
Yep.
at the hands of Caitlin Clark by 7 in the Elite Eight?
Right.
So it's an interesting question for all of those reasons. And the fact that at the end of the day, the season comes up short because you didn't finish it with the national championship. So just like 361 basketball teams, your season came up short in that way. But it's not like there wasn't lots of wins. It's not like you didn't finish with 31 victories.
Yeah.
It's not like you didn't make it to the Elite Eight. So it'll be very interesting.
Now the counter to that real quick is at no point did I, outside of, the first 10 minutes of the season, did I feel like they were at the same level as the best teams in the country. That to me is
sure, but was LSU prior to last year a team that was ever expected to be up there, that every single year was expected to be considered one of the very best teams in the country?
No. But with what they brought back and brought in, I think there's an argument. Just
sure.
With that collection of players, I don't feel like they reached their full potential, but also maybe that was partially just overachieving last season, right? Things aren't always perfect. It's just an interesting experiment that I feel like there's some interesting reflection to be done on whether good idea, bad idea, how much weight do you put into whether it worked or didn't, and right, this kind of weird thing where it wasn't terrible, it wasn't perfect. What do you actually do with it?
Indeed, the late game, UConn, number 3 seed, 80. Number 1 seed, USC, 73. Paige Beckers, 28, 10, and 6, 11 of 23 shooting. Aaliyah Edwards, 24, 6 rebounds, a block, 7 of 13 from the field. Those two players were excellent. Juju Watkins, 29 points, but it took her 25 shots to get there. I think she'd tell you that it wasn't the smoothest of nights for her. And for me, from tip to final buzzer, it was clear to me who the best player on the floor was, and it wasn't Juju Watkins. And UConn, in part due to that, is the one who will keep on dancing. 23rd Final Four, I believe, is what I saw.
Yep,
that's a ludicrous number. Making a bid for a 12th national championship, also a ludicrous number. But UConn back in the Final Four for the first time in a few years.
Yeah, defensively, I thought they were really good in terms of just making things difficult for Juju. Nobody was really efficient for USC. I mean, their offense was Juju, Mackenzie Forbes hitting a couple big shots, but not being efficient, and offensive rebounding. The rest of the team didn't offer that much in terms of scoring and offensive output. UConn's limited roster, the players that took the court, stepped up. Obviously, Paige Beckers did her job and was fantastic. Aaliyah Edwards gave you that second high-level scoring option, that second way to create offense consistently. Juju did set the freshman scoring record for a single season, by the way. Wanted to recognize that in this game.
Shout out Big time.
fantastic season comes to an end.
It's
And
interesting to see who she was passing there, and
mhm,
in the conversation for, in theory, what is she on pace for?
mhm,
It's just considering how much of this season has been about the individual um, achievements of Caitlin Clark, seeing some of the names like Kelsey Mitchell, like some of those other players that Juju passed in terms of freshman scoring. Of course, not suggesting, not necessarily suggesting that she's going to go on to break records that Caitlin Clark just set. That's not. I'm certainly not going all the way from A to B in that way, but to
she's
to
off to a good
see
start.
to see what kind of start she's off to, and who she's pacing with and outpacing through 1 year is is just interesting to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing for me in this game, outside of the fact that they took a while to hit some free throws there at the end and made this way more difficult, no, they still got the stops defensively, so it wasn't too stressful. They could have made this real difficult for themselves with the 7 missed free throws in a row, I think it was. It just looked like, and this was the thing that I was banking on in terms of picking UConn to go to the Final Four. It just looked like one of these teams had done this before and had been in these positions before.
Mm.
And that's because one of them has. And I know, yes, it's not like they've been to 3 straight Final Fours here and all these players have all this Final Four experience, but they make the Sweet 16, right? They win multiple NCAA tournament games every single year. Some of these players have been on a deeper run, not necessarily carrying this kind of responsibility because now instead of the freshmen, they're the senior leaders.
Mhm.
And obviously Gino's done this a bazillion times. That I think that really showed in this game, that despite the fact that they have 5 players who would have been on the floor who are injured, they navigated the foul trouble exceptionally well in terms of everybody kind of just pushed it to the limit.
Everybody
But
got to 4.
right.
Yeah.
And KK Arnold was the only one who got to 4 super early. So it was a
Mhm.
lot of people sticking at 2 when it was dangerous and 3 when it was dangerous, but they kept it under control so that you weren't trying to play, the same 5 players for the entire second half or something like that. And they've got players playing the entire 40 minutes. I mean,
Mm.
it is a real credit to the coaching job that Gino and that staff has done and these players for being able to navigate all of this and to stick together and to kind of regroup after a really bad start after all of the injuries, and they are playing really really good basketball right now. It's a cool story to see, and I think you're right on board with this, to see this kind of journey from UConn, because it is the complete opposite of what we associate UConn with, other than they're back in the Final Four. But the way they got there is completely different.
There's a lot of really fun things going on with this Final Four on the women's side, and we've talked about this a little bit when the brackets came out, but it's so much of this season has been about individual performance
Mhm.
for good reason. So much of this season has been about, look what these special players are doing on a regular basis. Look what, the culmination of Caitlin Clark's career. Look at, she's, basically become the most lucrative college basketball player ever this year from an individual statistics standpoint. And then whether it's, Juju Watkins or some of these other players, then you kind of have this, you have this giant, this elephant in the room, that none of these teams are better than South Carolina.
Right, who just somehow, I mean, basically rebuilt that entire team, or had players that were in smaller roles now stepping into the starting lineup, things like that. Had to really retool, and right, we just don't really talk about them. They just win every game. Yeah.
And then you have the giant, like capital T, capital G, of women's college basketball, and this team that is a 3 seed this year, and obviously 3 seed for many programs is the top of the pyramid in terms of, all-time type seasons, but for UConn, it's not. And there were times this year when they didn't look like a team that was quite on the level of some of, the Ohio States, the USCs, the South Carolinas, the Iowas of the world. And I even texted you in the Sweet 16 in their game against Duke. I said they probably on a normal night don't have enough to keep up with USC. And in some ways it was a normal night, in some ways it wasn't, and they got some great performances outside of Paige Beckers, and all of these things, contribute to why they're going to the Final Four. But it's there's this cool blend of what's made this women's season so exciting with some tradition, some familiarity of teams like UConn still being right there. It's a cool mix for sure.
Absolutely.
You also got you've got your UConn and your NC State on both sides of the bracket, by the way. You got
yes. The tweet went out again.
fantastic. Fantastic. I'm very happy for you. UConn, Gino Auriemma, Paige Beckers, the Huskies 80, USC 73. Anything else on that game, on the early game, before we quickly do some Final Four predicting?
I've got one thing. I'll throw it in here. It's related to the games. It should be a finable offense to sit there when you are still in the studio at 7:10, 7:15, and tell people game 2 starts at 9 p.m. That should be a finable offense. And I come from the world of CONCACAF, where games consistently start 20 to 25 minutes after they're supposed to. This was a half hour. And you knew that from before the first game tipped, because they were still in the studio at 7:10 or 7:15. That was my thought, is this is still going. No chance this game starts anywhere close to 9. They weren't even trying to pretend like it was going to start at 9. Just say it starts at 9:30. I don't care that you had the whole studio introduction. I thought it was pretty cool. It's fine if you don't start at 7. Just don't try telling us that it's going to start. The second game starts at 9. That infuriates me, because they weren't even trying to make it start at 9. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm irrationally upset about today.
I wasn't home at the beginning of the 7:00 game, and I kept going back to my ESPN app to see to keep up, and I kept thinking that my app was broken because it was 7:10, 7:12, and the game hadn't started yet.
Yes.
Or at least according to the ESPN app, the game hadn't started yet. And I thought, no way, this is the first game of the night. No way, it hasn't started yet. And what do you know?
Yep.
It's a very Josh Doering thing to be upset about. But I can't say that I'm not there with you. Okay. Men's Final Four, women's Final Four. Let's do some predictions really quick. We'll keep with the women's side, since that's what we've been chatting about here this evening. South Carolina, NC State, an NC State team that's going to fly in under the radar because of what else is going on in Cleveland. You've got an undefeated South Carolina team. Of course, you've got Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers and UConn on the other side of the bracket. But let's start on that side. South Carolina, NC State. What say you?
South Carolina. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Yeah. They are clearly the better team. That does not always mean they win. But as you like to say, don't overcomplicate things. Every indication is they're going to get this job done.
Agreed. I don't feel the need. They are too much to handle for what feels like everybody in the country. And when it comes to this national semifinal, it feels like that would be overcomplicating it to try to talk myself into NC State. Wouldn't be surprised if the game is close.
Absolutely.
It should be competitive. That's a really good Wolfpack team, but South Carolina is still ultimately at the end of the day, I think, too strong. On the other side, Iowa, UConn, number 1 seed, number 3 seed. We know about these two teams. We know how they've gotten here, what the story is. And it should be spectacular regardless of who wins. But this is one that should be a ton of fun.
Yeah, I'm going with the Hawkeyes.
Okay.
That I just think it's one bridge too far with where this UConn team is at from a health standpoint.
Sure.
And Paige Beckers can do what she did tonight and not be the best player on the floor.
Yeah.
That is the only team in the country in which that can be true. I mean, okay, maybe Juju had a couple games where she went into the Caitlin Clark stratosphere. But generally speaking, Caitlin Clark is the only player that can surpass a great performance from Paige Beckers. And to me, UConn is going to have 2 of the best 3 players on the floor. And it's going to have to be abundantly clear that they have 2 of the best 3 players on the floor. The only way they win this game is if Beckers keeps pace with Clark and then Aaliyah Edwards gets the better of that matchup with Hannah Stolke and really dominates the interior. To me, that's the formula. And I don't see it happening.
I think you're right. I think we'll get a better Hannah Stolke game.
Yep.
Than we got tonight. I think that, as I said a little bit ago, like at some point, Caitlin will do the thing, and it could be for the entire game, but she's good enough that if it's for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, as long as for some substantial amount of time she's really rolling. I think ultimately they're a little bit too much, and you can also throw in there that this is a Iowa team that has been here, that has done this, and from a UConn and their seasoned program at these points versus a USC team that might be a little bit newer to it. This is an Iowa team that a lot of these players, and more importantly, Caitlin Clark, knows what this week is about, knows what the type of pressure that's around it, the type of performance that is necessary. So she keeps showing up. I think she shows up, and I think your point of how good Paige Beckers would have to be in theory to be the best player on the floor is a really, really good point, and one that I'm going to subscribe to as well.
There you go.
There you go. On the men's side, on the left side of the bracket, really official. The left side of the bracket, UConn, Alabama. UConn absolutely steamrolling through this tournament. Alabama team that's that has Nate Oates offense their way to the Final Four. Hat tip to them. Josh, I think this is another one that I'm not trying to overcomplicate. There are many things that Alabama can do. I do not think that beating this UConn team is one of them.
I don't love this matchup for Alabama. I really think UConn's size and athleticism is going to bother them.
Mm-hmm.
The one caveat here, and I'm picking UConn. There is a chance that they shoot 55, 60% from 3 and take 30 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost you're forced to have a competitive basketball game because of the sheer amount of points they score from the 3-point line.
Mm-hmm.
I do not see that happening. If they start as slow as they did in the Elite Eight, this game is over because it's going to be 27-6.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't matter if they go lights out in the second half and Mark Sears can't miss. There is a chance because of the threes. But also the way that offense is structured, I don't love how that matches with what UConn is going to offer. So I'll take the Huskies.
Yeah, I think where I put UConn and Purdue in my head are not, maybe not in exactly the same place, but in a similar place. And Alabama earlier this season in early December went 19 of 46 from the 3-point line and wasn't able to beat Purdue.
Mhm.
Like I'm not even sure. Like they can do whatever they want from the 3-point line. If UConn plays well, but Alabama makes a bunch of threes on the other end, it still doesn't matter. It's going to need to be a combination of an unreal shooting night and something catching up with UConn in terms of them not shooting the 3-point ball well in the NCAA tournament. Clearly, it hasn't mattered yet. But I would be. This is a UConn team that is elite on both ends of the floor. Mark Sears is, I think, there's some size that they can throw at Mark
Yep.
Sears. It feels like every time that Alabama can't miss from the 3-point line, Mark Sears also can't miss from the 3-point line. That seems to be a big part of it. He was 8 of 16 from the
Yep.
3-point line against Purdue earlier this year in that game. So I just think there's so much that has to go right. And if in the other part of it is that if this game was happening on February 1st instead of on April 6th or whatever, that I wouldn't hesitate, wouldn't think twice about taking UConn based on what we know. But I think it's either going to be a complete blowout or it's going to be close. I kind of feel like, and close can be anywhere from 4 to 8 or 9 points, I think is a fair. But if Alabama can't get a 3 to go down, I think the dome effect is not. I think it's maybe a little overblown, but it happens.
Yeah.
It happens frequently enough that I think
Yep.
there's at least a little something there.
Especially when you're shooting 30 of them.
Yeah. So the team that needs to make a ton of them to beat the other team, I'm usually not going to lean that direction. And when it's a UConn team that we might get to the end of next week or to the beginning of next week, and they have a real case for one of the best college basketball teams we've seen, period. I'm not going to pick against that.
Yep.
On the other side, Purdue, Zach Edey, Matt Painter, 44 years since the last Final Four. Here they are again. Purdue versus NC State, 9 straight elimination games. We've heard it all. DJ Burns, not exactly the team that I thought Purdue was going to be playing in the Final Four. Somehow the poor Boilermakers could lose a Final Four game and it still be to a double-digit seed.
Yep.
I don't know how we ended up here, but we did.
It's the final, the second to last hurdle, right? Okay, they had to make the Final Four. Now they have to vanquish the double-digit seed, and then they have to beat UConn.
In some way, it's the final boss, and beating UConn would just be house money.
To a certain extent, yes.
Purdue, NC State, what you got?
I'm not backing down from the Boilermakers now.
Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord.
Yes, NC State's playing really good basketball. I would feel better if DJ Burns didn't have to go up against Zach Edey.
Yeah.
7'4" causes some issues when you're trying to play inside out and build around your big man. Also,
not to mention like DJ Burns is huge, but not necessarily from a height perspective.
Yeah,
he's all you can handle. Don't get me wrong. But
he will not have an issue guarding Zach Edey.
No, but I'm not sure Zach Edey will be all that bothered trying to get the 6 foot hook shot in the middle of the paint. I'm not sure that he's going to be all that bothered by DJ Burns.
That is the other part of it. Yes.
Yeah.
And also, what happens if, as most times when Purdue plays, foul trouble?
Mm-hmm.
Burns has to stay on the floor. We got 2 teams here. I just sincerely hope they meet in the national championship game because it would be epic. We would know we have a deserving national champion, and we would have a fascinating story coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
With all due respect to Alabama and NC State, I will be really disappointed if we don't get Purdue UConn.
It's the collision course we've been staring at for months now. It just is. And neither team has done anything in this tournament to suggest that that's not the collision course
Right.
that would put a bow on this season in a, I don't know if right is the right word, but in a satisfying way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, like, what if Purdue shoots like the number one 3-point shooting team in the country, which they are. They just beat Tennessee, going 3 of 15 from the 3-point line.
Yep.
Granted, that was a 40 ball from Zach Edey. I understand, but like, I would bet on Zach Edey giving me 28, giving me 30,
Yep.
somewhere in that ballpark.
You're still waiting for
And
a Fletcher Loyer explosion.
yep, Lance Jones wasn't great for a lot of that
Nope.
game.
And he's
All of
going to
these
go. I
things
mean,
are
he can guard
true,
DJ Horn.
and all of these things are true, and they still just beat Tennessee. So
Yep.
this is the epitome of there's no point in trying to analyze this tournament if you don't analyze things logically. If
Yeah.
you just throw it's Purdue and it's the NCAA tournament and NC State's rolling, like all of those things have some sort of implied truth behind them. But logic and reason is telling us that Purdue should overwhelm NC State. And we'll see if that's the way it rocks. But I'm totally fine with being wrong about that if it doesn't go that way.
And I expect both. I'll say this: I expect both these games to be pretty close.
I would enjoy them being competitive.
I don't expect either of them to. Now, UConn can just blow the doors off anybody at this point, apparently. But I expect these to be a little bit closer than most of the games. I expect it to look more like maybe not quite Purdue, Tennessee, because Tennessee is better than both of these teams, but somewhere in that ballpark where it does take some effort. And it's a 8-point game with 4 minutes left kind of thing. Not
Sure.
that either of them is in any real danger, but that we get competitive basketball games that NC State and Alabama have good showings, and it's not a what in the world did we just get in the Final Four? These games were decided by a combined 40 to 50 points. I don't see us getting that.
Purdue a 9-point favorite right now. UConn a 12-point favorite.
I'll take the under.
You'll take the underdogs to cover.
Yeah. So these games are decided by fewer than 21 points.
Sure. Okay. All right. I'd be fine with that. I'd also be fine with both of them just steamrolling and then just kind of just like the cherry on top of these, unstoppable force and movable objects kind of clash that we might get
Just
in the national
emphatic
championship game.
entrance.
Yeah. So there you go. It's gonna be fun. Women's Final Four on Friday night, men's Final Four on Saturday night. And we will come back to talk about it on Sunday night, correct?
Potentially a Friday
Potentially
podcast as
Friday.
well. We're still working on that part. There'll be a tweet coming later this week.
Potentially Friday, certainly Sunday, certainly post-national championship game on the men's side as well. Those two things will happen. We'll see about Friday, but
we got some travel and things going on over the weekend. So
it's quite a busy time.
Yeah.
But we have Final Fours. We're very much looking forward to them. That's gonna do it. Under 8 podcasts in 38 minutes. Naturally.
Hey,
Monday.
it's March.
Monday.
Well,
It's actually
April.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's actually Tuesday, April 2nd now. It's 12:24 p.m. Thank you for rocking with us this evening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 Pod on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you in Phoenix and see you in Cleveland.